Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith. I'll be conducting our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Bit of an overcast morning here as we're looking for a launch of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket, sending up 21 Starlink satellites to low Earth orbit. Taking a live look at Space Launch Complex 40, where that Falcon 9 is ready and waiting for its departure. 13 of the Starlink satellites on board feature direct-to-cell capabilities and would bring up the total number launched by SpaceX up to 440 to date. Our Stephen Young is running the technical operations of the broadcast today. Also standing by to do some tracking work as well. Given the long night, our photographer Michael Kane has this morning off, I should say. The photographer Adam Bernstein is down at Starbase doing some work in preparation for Flight 7 of SpaceX's Starship Super Heavy vehicle. So a lot of moving pieces this week. Of course, we had the launch attempt from Blue Origin and their New Glenn rocket in the early morning hours today. Take a live look at that for just a moment. You see, though, of course, for those who were asleep in the overnight hours, New Glenn still very much at the pad. Blue Origin encountered a subsystem issue and determined that it would take longer than they had remaining in the window to be able to execute a safe launch for the vehicle. So they made the call to stand down and are working on a firm backup date for the next launch opportunity. As we await confirmation of that, just look ahead at the weather for the New Glenn launch possibility. From a weather standpoint, an overnight launch attempt tonight would not be ideal, as the 45th Weather Squadron forecast just a 30% chance of favorable weather for a launch during the 1 to 4 a.m. Eastern window. That would be available as a 24-hour backup to this morning. Looking at a 48-hour delay. Weather improves to 90% chance of favorable conditions at liftoff, with the thick cloud layer rule and the liftoff winds being watch items. Also, the offshore landing weather for a 48-hour delay trending between a low to moderate risk on a scale of low to moderate to high. Of course, we'll keep close tabs on any further updates from Blue Origin and the next launch attempt available for their New Glenn rocket. You can see all the updates on our website, spaceflightnow.com. Head over to the launch schedule, and we'll be sure to update that just as soon as we have a new firm launch date. In the interim, though, we do have some good missions coming up here. Obviously, the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket poised to take off just before noontime here on Monday morning. Also, some of the folks in town right now are from Firefly Aerospace and iSpace, as they're preparing to share a Falcon 9 rocket for a launch set no earlier than Wednesday morning at 1:11 a.m. from Launch Complex 39A, sending those two robotic landers on their way to the moon's surface, both taking very different trajectories. In fact, just before this broadcast began, I was wrapping up a couple of conversations with some Firefly officials, the Vice President of Engineering, as well as the CEO, Jason Kim. So be sure to look for our coverage in the run-up to this exciting mission for Firefly and for iSpace. We'll have that for you again on our website, spaceflightnow.com, and right here on the YouTube channel, both for launch as well as a look ahead at what you can expect from those missions. As you're taking a live look right now at Pad 39A, you see the transporter erector just a little bit moved off of the heart of Launch Complex 39A. Began its roll down towards the hangar, but has been stopped there for a little while this morning. This mission does have a 6-day launch window in January, so if there are any updates to the current planned launch date, we'll be sure to provide those as they are available and as we learn them. Again, you can head over to our launch schedule on our website for the very latest on that mission as well. Coming back here to Pad 40 at the Cape, T-minus 49 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. I want to thank our more than 2,000 of you who are with us in this stream, kicking off this live coverage. Appreciate you who were with us last night. If this is your first launch attempt of the day, we're glad to have you with us. You could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button, allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Now T-minus 47 minutes and counting. We're powered by a wonderful channel member community who make these live launch opportunities possible. So thanks to folks like Jonathan McD, Chuck Close, Angela Cagle, Joe Piano, Sulfur for Lunch, Awakened One, Flippers 79, Mark McIntosh, Rick Donner, Christy Brown, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. As we're getting ready to turn to the start of fueling of the Falcon 9 rocket, let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline. This is the nominal series of events we're expecting with a smooth countdown to liftoff. First things first, SpaceX has to take the readiness poll, which is nominally at the T-minus 38-minute mark. If SpaceX feels like they're in a good posture to get into the flow of fueling, they can take that poll a little bit earlier since they do it electronically, but the 38-minute mark is, generally speaking, when that happens. Once prop load gets the green mark to begin, fueling starts at the T-minus 35-minute point with RP1 load on both the Falcon 9 first and second stage. That's a rocket-grade kerosene. Liquid oxygen also begins flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage, T-minus 35 minutes. T-minus 30 minutes, they begin to load a cryogenic helium onto the pressure vessels for the Falcon 9's first stage. Helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same will be true on the second stage a few minutes thereafter. T-minus 23 minutes, second stage RP1 loading wraps up. Then here at pad 40, T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds, the strong back chill down process gets underway. It's when SpaceX flows or is conditioning the feed lines at the pad prior to loading second stage liquid oxygen on board the Falcon 9 rocket. We see that visually with the so-called big vent that starts at about T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds here at pad 40. That vent lasting until about T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds, setting up for second stage LOXO to begin 30 seconds thereafter. Moving right along, the engine chill down sequence begins at T-minus 7 minutes, and that is when a small amount of liquid oxygen begins to flow through the plumbing and the turbo pumps, helping to protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. 6 minutes out, the first stage kerosene tank is full. T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back retract sequence get underway. After pressurization, the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings will open up, and then the strong back, or the transporter erector, reclines a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket and stays in that position until liftoff. At that point, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes out, the first stage liquid oxygen tank is full. Same is true on the second stage about a minute after that, at which point the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch 45 seconds out. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlins are healthy and ignite, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff. Once again, currently targeting 11:47 a.m. Eastern. It is 16:47 UTC, or T-minus 42 minutes and 21 seconds. T minus 40 minutes, 9 seconds and counting. Just a couple of minutes nominally from the point at which SpaceX launch team will make the call on the start of prop load today. The window as it currently stands stretches out until 1:45 p.m. Eastern. As long as SpaceX has not begun fueling its Falcon 9 rocket, it can extend out to that point. Unlike, say, the New Glenn rocket, once the Falcon has begun fueling, it is locking itself into launch attempt time. They use a load and go style of fueling with their super cold densified liquid oxygen. Essentially, that means they're fueling pretty close up to the point at which they're about to launch. And so any potential weather or technical issue that may come up once fueling has begun would mean a stand down from any further launch attempts today. So the SpaceX team will, of course, want to make sure that they're as sure as possible with where things stand, both for the rocket, the satellites, as well as weather conditions and any COLAs that they have to consider before proceeding with tanking the vehicle. If for whatever reason this launch window today just entirely does not pan out, they do have a backup launch opportunity starting tomorrow, Tuesday, January 14th at 9:32 a.m. Eastern. Also tomorrow, they are targeting a launch from the west coast of a rideshare mission called Transporter 12. Whole host of satellites going up on a Falcon 9 rocket from Vandenberg Space Force Base. Time now T minus 35 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. At this point, we're well past the mark where SpaceX will have made a determination on the start of fueling. If they feel like they're ready to proceed, tanking of the Falcon 9 rocket set to begin in just a little more than 30 seconds from now. As we await confirmation for the start of fueling, I want to thank a few folks for their support this morning. Want to welcome aboard Turtle Eightification, joining us with channel membership at the pad leader level. Welcome aboard, Turtle. Glad to have you with us. 35 minutes and counting. If the go was given, SpaceX is now fueling its Falcon 9 rocket. Now, T minus 32 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. It is not atypical at this point for SpaceX to not make a statement on the start of fueling when it comes to Starlink missions. So I'll have to rely on some visual cues here to give us confidence that tanking of the Falcon 9 rocket is in fact underway. Once they begin flowing a super cold densified liquid oxygen on board the first stage, a bit of a frost line starts to form just beneath the X in SpaceX at that part of the vehicle. Also see a little bit of vapor start to show up around that part of the vehicle as well. Time now, T-minus 29 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. Fairly hard to discern given the lighting conditions, but it does appear as though we're seeing some vapor around the Falcon 9 booster, suggesting that liquid oxygen is flowing on board the vehicle and that SpaceX is in fact tanking the Falcon 9 rocket in pursuit of a launch at 11:47 a.m. Eastern. We'll get a very good confirmation of this, of course, when we hit the T-minus 20-minute, 20-second mark, when the big vent shows us that they're conditioning the feed lines prior to second stage LOX load, but does seem to be the case that they are tanking the Falcon 9 rocket at this time. Now T-minus 27 minutes, 10 seconds and counting. In addition to the liquid oxygen that is being loaded on board the Falcon 9's first stage and the RP-1 or rocket-grade kerosene being loaded on the Falcon 9's first and second stages. A few minutes ago, at T-minus 30 minutes, they started loading the cryogenic helium into the pressure vessels on the first stage. Same is about to happen on the second stage, coming up here in about 40 seconds or so. With fueling underway on the Falcon 9 rocket, let's go ahead and take a moment to talk about where this Falcon will be flying once it leaves the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? Taking a look at a Google Earth view of Space Launch Complex 40, otherwise known as Slick 40, at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Falcon 9 rocket, in support of the Starlink 12-4 mission, is going to depart and fly in a southeasterly trajectory, moving away from Florida's Space Coast. The first stage booster supporting this mission, B-1080, making its 15th flight today, will follow the arc in red that you see there, and is targeting a landing on SpaceX's drone ship called a Shortfall of Gravitas today. If successful with this booster landing and recovery, this will mark the 94th landing of a booster on this particular drone ship. It'll also be the 316th drone ship landing for SpaceX and the 396th booster landing to date. Mentioned the booster B-1080 flying for a 15th time today. SpaceX working to certify its boosters for up to 40 flights each. In addition, the payload fairings will also be recovered and are working towards that certification mark as well. They will splash down into the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of parachutes, as seen in this image here in the middle of your screen. SpaceX saves about $6 million per recovery effort, so it's an important part of their business model to recover and refurbish them as much as possible. Once in the water, they'll be brought aboard a recovery vessel, then brought back into Port Canaveral, turned over to Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where the refurbishment process will get underway. SpaceX doesn't often talk about the flight history of its payload fairings, with the exception of getting into customer missions, Starlink notwithstanding, of course. So far as been recently discussed, the flight leader appears to be a fairing half that is flown for a 22nd time. There certainly could be one with more flights underneath its belt, but again, SpaceX doesn't often go into great detail or publish the flight history of the payload fairings. Nifty though that would be. That is not currently their operating practice. T-minus 23 minutes, 13 seconds and counting. Just a couple minutes away from the start of the so-called big vent. Like with the pair of hurricanes that we saw in 2024, SpaceX has been busy responding to the fires in Los Angeles with some of their Starlink terminals and support capabilities. In fact, just yesterday, SpaceX founder Elon Musk mentioned that they have a number of their Tesla Cybertrucks that are cruising through the greater LA/Malibu area with Starlink capability and offering free Wi-Fi and what he describes as a grid pattern to allow for folks to gain access for the many that have lost power and cell service and, of course, access to the internet. Time now T-minus 20 minutes, 51 seconds and counting. The conditioning of the feed lines is just now about to get underway. We should be seeing the big vent in about 20 seconds or so. And yes, apologies for the technical error there, referencing the launch of New Glenn. That is, of course, mission that we covered in the early morning hours, not what we're seeing right now, but we are seeing the start of the big vent. Hard to discern against a very cloudy Florida late morning, but you see that venting now getting underway from the strong back as the feed lines are being primed, conditioned for second stage liquid oxygen load. This is a good visual indication that fueling is happening on track and on time, and a good confirmation From what we believed to be the case, that fueling had begun when we said it did, and that in fact did check out. T-minus 16 minutes, 57 seconds and counting. This vent is getting ready to taper off here in about 20 seconds or so. Following a couple of changes to the T0 with this launch. So far at this point, everything has been moving along quite smoothly for SpaceX. As you see, the big vent has now tapered off. Second stage liquid oxygen load is about to begin coming up here in roughly 20 seconds. Time now T-minus 15 minutes, 11 seconds and counting, with second stage LOX load now about a minute into that process. The next milestone we're looking for is coming up at T-minus 7 minutes when the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket get underway. Want to talk a little bit about the payload on board this Falcon 9 rocket today. 21 Starlink satellites in total, 13 of which feature the direct-to-cell capability. As we mentioned at the top of the broadcast, this will bring the total number of direct-to-cell satellites that SpaceX has launched up to 440 following this mission. 13 of those, though, failed to reach an operational orbit following the upper stage anomaly experienced during the Starlink 9-13 mission back in July of last year. Each of these satellites weighs about 1,267 pounds, or about 575 kilograms. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon Hall thrusters as opposed to the previously used Krypton Hall thrusters for in-orbit maneuvers. They were built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle, and they'll be deployed at about 180 miles or 291 kilometers in altitude at a 43-degree inclination. In SpaceX's 2024 progress report, they did publish a nice rendering of the Starlink V2 Mini in its on-orbit configuration. This visual illustration of the laser mesh, laser link connection between the various Starlink satellites that are on orbit. According to expert orbital tracker and astronomer Jonathan McDowell, as of January 9th, there are currently a total of a little more than 6,900 Starlink satellites on orbit. About 2,800 of them are the Starlink V2 Mini variety. Apologies, folks. We're just experiencing a technical hiccup here. We'll bring our views of Pad 40 back in just a moment. Right now, you're taking a live look at Launch Complex 36, where Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket still remaining following the early morning scrub. And we do have our views back now of Pad 40. Now T-minus 11 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. As we're coming into the final 11 minutes of the count, want to thank the 7,900 of you who are with us live this morning. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button. Allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. I also want to thank a few individuals. Channel member Josh King with a $5 super chat. Appreciate the support this morning, Josh, who says, still a little bummed that Blue Origin couldn't launch today, but can't wait for the next attempt. Go Falcon, go New Glenn, and Starship. Appreciate the kind words. Also have a very lovely and generous $20 super chat from my mother, Mary Robinson, checking in from Sacramento, California, which I haven't checked the forecast this morning, but hopefully is sunnier than what we're seeing here in the Sunshine State right now. And I also want to thank Stephen Olive for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships, growing our community here. Appreciate that, sir. And to our 5 newest channel members, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Stephen in the live chat. And we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. booster launching today at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket, tail number 1080 in the SpaceX fleet. Before it goes ahead and notches launch number 15, let's go ahead and take a look at where it has flown before. Take a little trip down at memory lane. Its first flight was a private astronaut mission to the International Space Station. AX-2 launching that quartet of folks aboard the Crew Dragon named Freedom. Former NASA astronaut, current Axiom Space astronaut Peggy Whitson commanding this mission, and she'll be heading back to the International Space Station later this year as the commander of the AX-4 mission. Next flight for this booster was the European Space Agency's Euclid Wide-Angle Space Telescope, lifting off on July 1st of 2023, followed up by Starlink launches. We had first Starlink 6-11 on August 27th, and then 6-24 on October 22nd. That was followed up by another mission for Axiom Space based in Texas, AX-3. Another flight for another former NASA astronaut, Michael Lopez Alegria, commanding the AX-3 crew to the ISS, lifting off on January 18th. This booster then launched another Dragon to the International Space Station, this time without crew on board. This was the CRS-30 mission, marking the first launch of a Dragon 2 spacecraft off of Pad 40. That launched to orbit, lifting off on March 21st. That was followed up by a pair of Starlink flights, Starlink 6-52 on April 18th, 6-62 on May 23rd. Up next, a mission for one of SpaceX's longest-standing customers, SES, based in Luxembourg. Launch of the Astra 1P/SES-24 mission. Another flight to the space station for this booster, this time launching a Cygnus spacecraft for Northrop Grumman. This was the NG-21 flight. Then back to Starlink land we go, leading us up to the present day. Starlink 10-10 on October 15th, 6-69 on November 11th, 12-1 on November 25th, and Starlink 12-2 on December 23rd. And that, of course, leads us up to this morning, where in T-minus 6 minutes and 11 seconds, we are poised to see the launch of Starlink 12-4. Now just past the 6-minute mark. At this point, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Coming up on our next milestone, pressing for a strong back retract. We should be getting views from the pad there in the next minute or so as well. Also should be getting some mission audio from SpaceX momentarily.
Strong back retract.
Hear that good call for the start of strong back retract. Now getting our first pad level views from SpaceX. You see the Falcon 9 standing tall there at Space Launch Complex 40, Slick 40.
Strong back retract has started.
Shortly, we'll see the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings open up, and then the transporter erector, otherwise known as the strong back, will recline a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket and stay in that position until liftoff. See the clamp arms opening there. And it looks like these, at least the payload fairing facing us, certainly has the hallmarks of being flight proven. Again, because SpaceX doesn't readily publish the flight history of the payload fairings, hard to discern how many flights these may have conducted so far. One little bit of housekeeping, you'll notice the countdown clock difference between what's in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, our clock, versus what's coming in from SpaceX. Our countdown is in real time. What's coming in from SpaceX is on a slight delay. So as long as we have good views of the Falcon 9 rocket from the ground, we'll make these callouts in real time and turn to the SpaceX clock once we pivot to the onboard cameras exclusively. Now less than 3 minutes to liftoff. Should be hearing the call shortly that the first stage LOX tank is fully loaded.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
Last fueling milestone coming up here. Confirmation of second stage LOX load being complete. Should hear the call out in about 20-ish seconds from SpaceX. Coming up on the 2-minute mark in real time. Want to quickly thank channel member Chuck Close for a very generous $25 super chat. Thank you, sir, for your support.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
Good call from SpaceX. The Falcon 9 now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. What you're seeing there, this additional venting, this is the ground gas closeouts as they're clearing any remaining liquid oxygen from the feed lines. Now less than a minute and a half to go before liftoff.
Ground gas closeouts.
Good call from SpaceX. We're now just about a minute before launch. Falcon 9 will soon be in startup. And the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the onboard flight computers. Less than a minute to liftoff. 50 seconds.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Good call from SpaceX. We will now be hearing the SpaceX launch director give their go for launch. That should come out in the next 3 seconds or so.
Launch director, go for launch.
With that call, we are clear to see the Falcon 9 take off from Space Launch Complex 40 coming up here in just 20 seconds. "15 seconds. And here we go in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition. And liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 12-4 mission. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Now a little more than a minute into flight in real time, Falcon 9 will be throttling
Falcon
down
is supersonic.
as it passes through max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle.
Max Q.
Good call for max Q from SpaceX. Falcon 9 will pass through a few different milestones in fairly rapid succession here. Shortly you'll hear the call for Merlin vacuum engine chill. In the next minute,
Vac chill has started.
good call there. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff at about T plus 2 minutes and 24 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation a few seconds after that. Then the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine, followed by payload fairing deployment right about the 3-minute mark. Very cloudy beneath the Falcon 9 rocket, as you can see from the onboard cameras here. Unfortunately, making it very difficult to track today. Now about a little less than 10 seconds until main engine cutoff, or MECO, per the SpaceX onboard camera timeline. Taking a look at the interstage here.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation.
MVac ignition.
All good calls from SpaceX. Some good visuals from the Falcon 9 rocket today. You see that booster making its way down towards the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas positioned down in the Atlantic Ocean. The hypersonic grid fins deploying, soon we'll see the payload fairings separate and make their way towards the ocean below.
Fairing separation.
Good call, good visuals. Those Starlink satellites now exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time on this flight. See one of those fairing halves just off the edge of the engine nozzle here on the right-hand side of your screen. Coming up, the next milestone for SpaceX will be the start of the first stage entry burn. That's set to begin about T plus 6 minutes and 4 seconds. This burn lasting a little less than 30 seconds in total.
Both vehicles are on a nominal trajectory.
Good confirmation from SpaceX that all is operating as expected at this point in the flight. Those periodic puffs you're seeing on the Falcon 9 first stage booster in between the grid fins, those are the cold gas thrusters which help to adjust the attitude or the positioning of the first stage booster as it reorients itself towards the drone ship. Now about 5 minutes into this mission per the SpaceX feed, a little bit further than that in real time. Taking a look up through the inner stage there on the left-hand side of your screen. Appears to be a good upper stage burn so far in this stage of flight. We're now just about 30 seconds away from seeing the start of the entry burn here. This
Both vehicles continue to follow a nominal trajectory.
Stage 1, FTS has safed.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
good call for the start of entry burn. Again, this will last a little less than 30 seconds in total.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
Stage 2, FTS has safed.
Now a little more than 7 minutes into flight. Coming up on the start of the landing burn here at about T plus 7 minutes and 52 seconds.
Stage 1 entry transonic.
Falcon first stage now traveling below the speed of sound, less than 6 kilometers above the drone ship. Just about 10 seconds to the start of the landing burn, when SpaceX will reignite the center Merlin engine to cushion the landing as
Stage
the
1 landing burn.
landing legs are deployed. You see the start of the landing burn? Let's listen in.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And a good 15th landing of that booster, B1080. Conditions considerably nicer where the drone ship is than where we are here on Florida Space Coast.
Invac shutdown.
And with the conclusion of that upper stage engine burn, the Falcon 9 second stage enters into a parking orbit where it will coast until T plus 53 minutes, 58 seconds. There will be a brief 2-second burn to circularize the orbit, setting up the Starlink satellites to be deployed at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 7 seconds. So far, a very nominal flight of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket on this Starlink mission, the 4th dedicated Starlink flight of the year. SpaceX notched a total of 89 dedicated Starlink missions by the end of 2024. We'll see where things end up by year's end this go around. Taking a look back at the pad with the strong back, will be making its journey back into the upright position to help turn around the pad as quickly as possible for the next Falcon flight coming right around the corner. Let's go ahead and talk about our mission stats as they currently stand, with a good booster liftoff and landing, concluding flight number 15 for B1080. This marked the 423rd Falcon 9 launch to date, the 6th Falcon 9 launch of 2025. This was SpaceX's 367th Falcon booster reflight, with the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was SpaceX's 6th orbital launch of the year so far, with no Falcon Heavies on the books just yet. This is their 135th orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 228th orbital launch for SpaceX from Pad 40, and the 282nd overall orbital launch from this pad as well. Here's the graphical representation of where SpaceX is on the year for its Falcon family of rockets, Moving on to some recovery stats, this was the 94th booster landing on the drone ship, a shortfall of Gravitas. That marks the 316th drone ship landing for SpaceX to date, and the 396th overall booster landing as well. Finally, with some industry stats, this is going to be fairly repetitive as we're still very early in the year, but this was the 5th orbital flight from Florida, the 6th from U.S. soil, the 6th from U.S. rocket company, and the 8th launch attempt around the globe. At this point, there have been no orbital launch failures, and here is where the pie chart now stands. U.S. with 6, China with 2, and the next U.S. launch set to take place from Vandenberg Space Force Base as soon as tomorrow morning, the launch of Transporter 12. I want to thank our friend Pete Carsons with MaxQ Productions for providing tracking support, although we got kind of snuffed by the clouds today. That's the way the cookie crumbles. I want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. I want to thank our moderators, Aussie Space Girl and Callistia Lee, for helping to hold it down in the live chat. Broad thanks to our channel member community for making this coverage possible, but mostly thanks to you for wherever you are watching from. We appreciate your time and attention, and we look forward to bringing you more live launch coverage in the very near future. A final thank you to RN4 Vets New York for a very generous $20 super chat to send us out the door, and we will be back with more live launch coverage before you know it. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.